tell me about the Ligma Johnson prank. That particular day, I just happened to be at the gym that's in the Twitter building in the morning, and I saw a bunch of cameras outside, and I thought it would be interesting if I walk out with a few boxes and see if the cameras fall for it, and they did. That sort of, kind of spiraled out of control. I didn't expect it to blow up that much, but it did. I do get recognized in San Francisco quite a lot on the street even today. People ask for selfies, which is why I wear a Julius t-shirt all the time, so it's like free marketing for Julius. I think we have at least 10 more years of product development to do. The way I think about this is, as long as we're obsessed with our users, that's all that matters. And the third thing is, I think, to have fun.
Welcome to Building with AI, the show where we engage in conversations with world-class AI product builders and leaders. We help uncover tactical insights that help you build and scale better AI products. I'm your host, Arun Chaudhry, and today we're joined by Rahul Sonwalkar, the founder and CEO at Julius.ai, an AI data analyst that helps users analyze datasets, create visualizations, and gain insight from structured data. We discuss Rahul's entrepreneurial journey, including his time with big tech companies like Facebook and Uber, the infamous Ligma Johnson prank, and the launch of his own venture. During the episode, he also discusses the inspiration for creating Julius before the ChatGPT moment, Julius's rapid growth to 500,000 plus users, how to think about competition in the AI space, the importance of testing and user feedback, and much more. But before we dig in, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Autoblocks is the leading AI evaluation platform for product teams. It enables your team to collaboratively iterate on prompts, model parameters, and RAG parameters, while letting you retain full control over whatever frameworks or tech stack you want to build with. Seamlessly run tests to evaluate the impact of product changes on quality. Learn how to ship more reliable LLM products at Autoblocks.ai. Now, back to the episode.
All right, Rahul, welcome to the show. Thanks for having me. My pleasure. Well, for anybody who's not familiar with who you are or Julius, you mind giving a quick introduction?
Totally, yes. I'm Rahul. I'm the founder of Julius.ai. Julius is an AI data analyst that helps you analyze data sets, create visualizations, and get insights from your structured data. We launched about 10 months ago, and since then have crossed 500,000 users, over 1 million data visualizations created. And one of my favorite metrics recently has been the lines of code that's written by AI on Julius and executed by the AI. And as of this week, we write and execute over 1 million lines of code every 48 hours. So that's Julius.
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, walk me through the journey. You worked at a few different tech companies and then you decided to start your own company. Walk me through that entire journey from your background and experiences, the ChatGPT moment, and what breakthrough or thought or series of thoughts had led you to saying, hey, I want to start something in the AI space, specifically around analyzing data and code?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll take a step back and quickly talk about my journey up until here. So I finished college 2020, and in college, I really liked going to hackathons and building applications and tools and ideas. After college, I ended up working at companies like Facebook and Uber for a couple of years. And while that was fun, it was not fun at the level I hope it would be. And I really wanted to go build up my own ideas and build something from scratch that solves real problems. So I quit my job and started hacking on different ideas, went through a bunch of different iterations before we got to Julius. It took us about a year and a half to get to Julius of different iterations. This was all before the ChatGPT moment too, when we got started. So we sort of knew that these models are really good at writing code. And if they can do that, then can they write SQL? And can they query massive databases or data sets and help get people insights from massive amounts of data without the people needing to be experts in programming? So we experimented a lot on different angles. And about 10 months ago is when we arrived at Julius, when we realized everything from statistical analysis to data analysis to data science, process Excel files. So if we can make this really work, if we can build an AI data analyst that helps you get insights out of your data, that would, help people a lot. So we built Julius, we launched Julius after, 4 or 5 different ideas. And within the first or second week, it was clear that, okay, this is the form factor people want. So that's like a brief overview.
How's that journey been so far? I mean, obviously the space has been just red hot and it's a center of attention in Silicon Valley. And so starting down that path and having seen developments in some of these foundation models and improvements in tools like ChatGPT, I'm curious, like, how has Julius as a product evolved over time in response to some of the market dynamics? And what are some of the interesting things that have happened since you founded the company?
One of my biggest insights as somebody building AI applications has been your vision is not everything. Like, your vision is nothing, in fact, unless you test it against reality. So we pretty early on made the decision to have quick iteration cycles because the AI space is moving really fast. There's new capabilities being unlocked every week, every other week. And what you want to do is you want to first build a product that sets itself up to incorporate those capabilities. Number one. Number two is you're always tinkering with new models, evaluating whether they're good for your use case or not good for your use case. What are the new use cases being unlocked with the new models? And finally, a lot of it is talking to users. Like, you could have the coolest application that does really cool things, but people will only use it because they're curious. They won't really use it again if it's not something that solves a problem for them. So we spend a lot of time building something that didn't solve a problem for people. And after several iterations, when we arrived at Julius, it was pretty clear in the first week because we built a plugin and put it out there for people to play with. And then we didn't know for the first week that people were paying us because our Stripe API keys in production were our test API keys. So the payment would go through, but it would never just let us know that, hey, the user paid you. Until some users reached out and said, hey, you got the payment, right? And then that was like a moment where we realized, okay, this is something that actually solves a problem for the users. Now, what's exciting about the ChatGPT moment, which happened about eight months before Julius launched. ChatGPT came out end of November 2022. Julius launched July 2023. And what happened with the ChatGPT moment was, first of all, the barrier to using these models and just playing with these models and developing the intuition of how to talk to these models went down by a lot, right? You used to have these prompt engineering hacks going viral all the time. Like, if you ask the model in this way, you could probably get it to write ASCII code for you. And then after ChatGPT came out, it sort of democratized just talking to the model to a lot of people. And there have been a few moments like this before that. So one of the floating ideas before ChatGPT was, chain of thought. Hackers who were building with AI applications or AI models knew pretty early on that if you ask the model to sort of produce some tokens before giving you the actual output, it gives you a better output. This was sort of like known in the forums and on Reddit and on Discords. And then until somebody actually came out and wrote a paper on it and demonstrated that this actually improves accuracy, and then it sort of became conventional wisdom. So I think there's a few of these moments that happen all the time that have happened in the last couple of years where ideas have floated around and people have sort of known of them, but until there's like a moment like, oh, the chain of thought paper came out or ChatGPT came out, that this sort of solidify and become like a pillar in how you build applications. So that's why, just ability to tinker and like play with these ideas and incorporate all the new stuff that's coming into your product is, I think, really important. And that's what we've been focused on for the last year or so.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you mentioned there that are really interesting. One is how the space has been just establishing new norms through some folks that are tinkering with things like prompts and different techniques for prompting. And some folks might find it a little bit silly that there's a research paper on how to effectively prompt, or like a different prompting technique. It may come across as a bit trite on surface, but the fact of the matter is these are becoming standardized techniques, and they are actually lending to pretty significant and meaningful improvements in AI systems that are being used in pretty critical capacities across a bunch of different verticals. So that is a really interesting thing, and I really like the way that you phrase that, how the space is congealing around some of these new practices. Also, the point that you made around just company building in general, I think draws a lot of analogies to AI product development, which I want to dig into in a little bit more detail. So you mentioned the vision is nothing. It's really about testing your idea into space. And in the AI space, when it comes to developing some of these tools and technologies, testing and evaluations is so critical to making sure that your AI system is accurate and reliable. And I would say this test-driven development workflow that a lot of companies have to incorporate when they're working with LLMs is relatively empirical compared to testing deterministic code, where you're working with test cases and you really don't know how this system's going to perform or behave until you run those test cases through. In the same way that you described a company, you don't really know how a company is going to behave or perform in a market until you put it in front of the market and get some feedback from users. And so curious if you could draw that analogy any more, or how you think about testing and evals in that similar context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're spot on. I think startups are a really simple algorithm that's really hard to execute. It's sort of like talk to users, figure out what they want, build the thing that they want, give it to them, and if they like it, ask them to pay you. It's a really simple algorithm, but it's really hard to execute because there's all these different factors that affect the outcome. So startup building is sort of like constant iteration, going back to the whiteboard, asking good questions, testing those questions, executing. And in a way, these models are also non-deterministic, right? That's a really powerful thing about them because they can be so general purpose. The same model that helps you write an essay can also help you write a really powerful code script or help you debug GPU programming issues. And so the beauty of these models is that they're kind of non-deterministic, so there's always fun tinkering with them and figuring out what they can do. But it also makes it really hard to deploy them into production and making sure when you have thousands of users using it, that all thousands of users get a reliable experience that you promised them. So Julius, for example, has over 500,000 users, and even if 10% of the times the models don't perform in a way that we want them to, that's like 50,000 users affected. And so that's a real challenge. And it's a thing that we know, and we constantly put in a lot of work in evaluating it and making sure that when there's things like regression, right? Let's say a particular use case used to work really well for us with model A, but then model A 1.5 comes out or model A2 comes out, and all of a sudden it's smarter overall, but this use case that we used to promise before is sort of breaking. It's hallucinating some parts of the tokens or some tokens that didn't used to before. So evaluating performance and constantly playing with your own product also, I think, is really important. But unlike traditional software engineering, when you like write some code, write unit tests, and you deploy it, and it's supposed to work as long as all the dependencies work and as long as nothing else changes. These models, it's sort of non-deterministic, so you have to constantly keep evaluating them.
And so how do you set up your testing and evaluation workflow? Like, what does it look like, and how do you optimize for that really tight feedback loop with your customers and users?
Yeah, so one of the advantages of having users is they tell us when something breaks and they get really mad at us. So one of the things our users do is, say, if you get our Pro plan, you get my personal phone number, where users can text me any questions they have, candid feedback, or they can yell at me when something doesn't work. So that was our primary signal early on. Over time, then we collecting a lot more feedback on how the users are rating the model performance. One of the things we do is on the third message, when you talk to Julius, every third message, and then after that is sort of random, we surface a star rating, kind of like how you would rate an Uber driver. You can rate it 1 star, 2 stars, 5 stars. And we collect a ton of metrics on how our users are rating the model's performance, how our users are rating the output. Is it helping them? And a goal is, how do we hit the most 5 stars by the third message? We want the user to be happy by the third message, because if they aren't happy, then they are very less likely to send a fourth message. They're going to have a bad experience. They're going to leave, right? So that's something we care about deeply. And when users rate a chat 1 star, that's when we log it to Slack. We log the error trace to Slack. We figure out what went wrong here. How can we improve this? Is this model regression? Is it something else? So that's been our primary source so far of running evals.
So one of the benefits you have with such a large user base is that you can pick up on these things very quickly, and it seems like you have the systems in place for doing that with your Slack integration and whatnot. Before you had all of those users, and maybe still today, if you're maybe deploying some changes to a product and you want to understand how it's going to behave locally before that, how do you deal with prototyping something in absence of user feedback to make sure that it's not going to break on edge cases when you deploy to production?
Yeah, totally. So there's definitely a challenge where we want to test ideas as quickly as possible. Usually what happens in background in Julius is a user asks for a certain thing, and somebody on the team feels really passionately that we should have this in the product. So they'll go hack all night, try to get that into the product, and then feature flag enable it to that user, get certain feedback. And that helps us validate whether it works for that user or that use case. So that's step 1. Step 2 is validating whether this breaks for other users. So slowly we have been building out, evals internally to help test that and help us roll things out quickly without any regression. But it's still like a cat and mouse, where there's sometimes when users just reach out and tell us, hey, this thing I used to do doesn't work. But we're able to quickly figure that out and resolve that.
In your market, it's quite competitive in the sense that, as it's the case with most markets in Gen AI, there's a lot of new entrants that are getting into the space. I think part of what makes the different markets in the broader Gen AI segment so competitive is, one, the tooling is so new that everybody kind of came to the same conclusions all at once, right? It wasn't like a slow burn sort of thing where the unique insight comes at the end of a lot of research or eventually the straw breaking the camel's back. It was like, oh shoot, all of a sudden we have LLMs that are really, really good. And so I can think about different use cases for using them. And it's created a very competitive space. How do you deal with the competitive pressures in your market? What are some of the company principles that you've embedded in your team and in your company to essentially continue finding your space in the market and to hold off folks like OpenAI who are rolling out improvements to, for example, Code Interpreter? How do you see Julius in that competitive dynamic?
Great question. I think about this quite a lot, especially because I think it tends to occupy everyone's mind here in San Francisco who is either building with AI or building AI products or wants to work on AI products. The way I think about this is, as long as we are obsessed with our users, and as long as we are building products that our users want, and as long as we are able to find innovative ways to incorporate model capabilities into product, that's all that matters. And in a way, you're absolutely right that this was like a watershed moment that suddenly all of these applications became obvious and everyone wants to build those applications. But at the same time, I think the amount of market that we have, or the portion of the market that has been penetrated, is so small today. If you look at ChatGPT users, right? ChatGPT has about, this is public numbers, I just found this online on SEMrush. Their monthly visits have sort of been flat since last May, and it's only a small portion of total internet users. So total internet users, most internet users haven't yet used ChatGPT, and which means that ChatGPT still can grow tenfold, and there's like so a massive growth potential. That's number one. Number two is, in fact, we're really grateful for big AI companies to go out there and do the marketing for us, like educate the market for us. When they do that, they create awareness in the market that, wait, AI can solve all these problems for me that I used to struggle with and spend a lot of time on. An example of this is, I was talking to one of our users, Tommy. He's a researcher at an aging institute, and he collects a ton of data on experiments around aging, and he's a biologist, right? He used to work with the bioinformatics person on his research lab who left, and now he's not able to do the computations for his experiments that he was able to do before, because the person on the team left. Then he found Julius, and he reached out to us telling us this is a huge lifesaver for him because it helps him run experiments, analyze that data, do all the bioinformatics within minutes, instead of before he would have to give it to his colleague who left, and the turnaround time was days and weeks. So we feel really meaningful when users like Tommy reach out to us and tell us, I'm able to speed up the anti-aging research that I'm doing because now I have this AI assistant who helps me with statistical and data analysis. And I think there's millions of Tommies out there who are potential users for Julius. What we do need is we need a more market education. We need companies with big marketing budgets to go out there, educate the market for us, so that when the users, they go look for best data analysis tools with AI, they find Julius and they use Julius and they realize we have the best capabilities, we have the best experience, most accuracy, and the best product overall, and they choose to use Julius. Now, this all hinges upon whether we have the best product or not. And this all comes back to what I said earlier, which was, as long as we're obsessed with our users, as long as we're obsessed with solving the problems for them, we have a pretty good shot at success. Now, I actually think that you mentioned Code Interpreter, and I think Code Interpreter is a good product. You know, I've used it several times myself. There's a lot of things that people who actually analyze data need that Code Interpreter doesn't have. One of them is more specific and more pretty charting and data visualizations. That's something we're focused on, is how do we help people visualize the data they have. Second thing is Julius not only supports Python, it supports R. A lot of people do their work, or their colleagues do their statistical analysis and data analysis in R, not in Python. We're hoping soon Julius will have GPUs. You can supercharge your computations. Instead of waiting 30 minutes to run an experiment analysis, you can do that within seconds by running the computations on a GPU. And when I met Jensen, that's what I pitched him. Imagine if, millions of people out there who have data on their hands and who want to do programming and coding and analysis, but they can't do it because the barrier to learning code is so high. If Julius can serve as their assistant and just write all the code for them, which it does today, like writes 1 million lines of code every 48 hours, that's really powerful. And all of a sudden you have 10 times the users for GPUs who can do computations, high performance computing, scientific computing, all that with just English. So as long as we're focused and building out, better charting, better visualizations, better kernels, better computational layer, all that, I think we will have something that people will want. And that's the focus.
So I want to dig into the Jensen piece a little bit, but I have a couple of questions first, because I saw that tweet of yours, and for folks who aren't familiar, Rahul's talking about Jensen Huang, the CEO at NVIDIA. But I think the point you're making about just leveraging that customer obsession to build a tool that solves the exact needs of users and does it in a way that's very delightful and very considerate and iterates quickly based on customer feedback is such an important one, because we've seen so many cycles already since the ChatGPT moment where people have just expected ChatGPT to essentially replace every website on the internet. I remember when the plugin store was rolled out, people were like, all right, this is the end of websites as we know it. And that was a thing, right? And who's to say that that's not going to be the case in the next couple of years? But in hindsight, it does seem like a lot of those claims were quite sensationalist. That you've worked at companies like Uber and Meta in the past, and there's a concept of a super app, just an app that has so many different functionalities that have synergies in between them, and the convenience is that everything is kind of in one app. But when I open up Uber nowadays, I kind of get confused, right? It's like I open up Uber and it's like I want it to do one thing really, really well and be best at class at that. And all of a sudden there's a bunch of different things. And I know the analogy isn't exactly one-to-one in the AI space, because there are clear synergies with being able to share context between different functions and whatnot for convenience sake. But you're always going to have tools that specialize. And the benefit that they have when they specialize is that they can be really, really good at one particular thing. And I think it's no different in the AI space. Folks that are obsessed with solving one specific problem have the benefit of tight feedback loops, being able to iterate on customer feedback, and they oftentimes don't have some of the opportunity costs that some of these super apps might have as well, where it's a bit of a whack-a-mole problem, where if they focus on one area or make one improvement, there's 100 of other use cases that they need to take into consideration that might also present headwinds for them to be able to execute on those things quickly. So I totally hear you on that, and I think that's a really valid point and something worth calling out.
Actually, quickly on that, I think besides plugins, there's other examples like the GPT store, which came out in November. People thought that would be over the end of there's no point anymore in building applications on top of GPT. And I think people sort of depends on who people is, but I don't think our users care whether there's plugins or not, or there's GPT store or not. And as long as your users don't care, that's all that matters. And to your point about, specializing, I think a great analogy there is Yahoo. Yahoo used to have this portal back in the 90s that had search, directory, news, weather, games, entertainment, all this in a single portal. And Google's early approach was, this is just search. Like, we just help you find information on the internet. And I think that's sort of similar to a company like Perplexity, where there was this massive launch February 2023 between GPT-4 and Bing, and literally Bing gave out GPT-4 for free. You could literally go use GPT-4 on Bing for free before OpenAI even announced it. But nobody cared. And Perplexity is still like 10x in their users since then. So I think that matters a lot.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. And you talked a little bit about some of this, how this customer obsession reflects amongst your users, and how you've actually created a lot of users that are huge, huge fans of Julius. And I know you share some of those testimonials and that feedback on Twitter. There was one when I was digging into Julius that I was able to find, which essentially compares Julius and Code Interpreter. And one of your users responded essentially a few deficiencies in Code Interpreter, and then I'll just read the sentence out loud, and then we'll also present it for folks to be able to read. So Alicia says, Julius gives me that next level interaction as it lets me run statistical analyses, recommends next steps in the process of data analysis, allows you to interact and ask questions about the analyses, cleans your data set, creates highly technical graphs, troubleshoots code, summarizes PDFs on peer-reviewed literature, and is able to access the internet at real-world time. At real-world time, parentheses, the chat was limited to 2022 from the last time I used it. And then she also mentioned things about being able to switch from Python and R whenever you want to code. And So there's a laundry list of these, I guess you'd call them like longer tail of features that are actually quite valuable to folks that are focused on this specific use case. And so it seems like it's really resonating with your users. And I'm curious, what are some of your favorite testimonials or ways that folks are using Julius that just makes you very excited?
Yeah, totally. So there's definitely a laundry list of features that differentiate Julius with Code Interpreter. I think the most important one on that laundry list that this user pointed out was troubleshooting errors. So one thing we focus a lot on is, look, you give the AI a task and it's going to write code and then run that code in a sandbox and then execute that code in a loop, figure out whether it needs to write more code or it needs to give you an answer back. Now, in a happy case, that code just works in the first time, but that doesn't always happen. The code sometimes has errors because the models have knowledge cutoff date, or they overlook certain parts of the task for a variety of reasons. And so what we're focused on heavily is making sure that when the errors happen, can we collect metrics on what are the most popular errors and how do we troubleshoot them really, really well so that it actually works when users try to do it and it doesn't stall. So a big complaint we heard from a lot of users was, OpenAI, they're trying to train the next biggest model, great, and Code Interpreter is just like sort of side thing for them. So they're sort of giving a Python REPL to these models. They aren't obsessed about figuring out and squashing out the most common errors in the code, making sure the computations run quickly, all these different things. So as a result of that, when you give an actual task that you want to do to Code Interpreter, it will run in the loop and eventually stall. And a lot of users of Julius have tweeted about this. In fact, one of the great things is, people tweet about Code Interpreter not being able to do something, and then people recommend Julius, and then they try it, and it actually works. So because we're obsessed so heavily on correct code, making sure we recover from the errors as quickly as possible and give the user an output that's meaningful, that's what we're focused on. I think that's one of the most important things in the laundry list. But some of the other meaningful ways has been, there's a professor at Rice University. He teaches a class to his MBA students. The class is called AI-Powered Financial Analysis. And the class is entirely taught using Julius. Like, they teach the whole class. There's pretty much every single slide in the class that talks about, here's how you use Julius to do certain thing. And the slides are all about prompt Julius with this, and then prompt it with this. And then the assignments are all with Julius. And the fact that people go to business school and learn to do financial analysis with Julius is really, really exciting to us, because this user, as it turns out, he has been a user since we originally launched back in July. And he only reached out to us a couple months ago and told us, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been a paid user for many months, and I'm going to teach a class this spring semester, and I'm going to teach the whole class with Julius. And the whole class learns Julius and financial analysis with Julius. So there's Tommies of the world who are doing aging research with Julius. There's this Professor Beck who is teaching financial analysis with Julius. And we think that there's a lot of these people out there who have data on their hands and have the curiosity to ask questions about the data, but they lack the expertise to go and actually implement the analysis. And that's where Julius really helps them get those insights. So stories like these are like really inspiring to us.
It's incredible. And so to backtrack a little bit, you talked about meeting Jensen recently, Jensen at NVIDIA. And so I'm curious what that conversation was like. And actually before that, I would like to ask you the question that you probably get most as a first question in the interviews that you do based on my research, which is, tell me about the Ligma Johnson prank and just the story behind it, how that went down, and how that's impacted the trajectory of your career, really, and how it might be playing a role in your ability to connect with folks today as the founder of Julius.
And I love, playing with systems. And I think like people are also systems in a certain way that you can engineer or reverse engineer or social engineer. That particular day, I just happened to be at the gym that's in the Twitter building in the morning, and I saw a bunch of cameras outside, and I thought it would be interesting if I walk out with a few boxes
and see if the cameras fall for it. And they did. That sort of, kind of spiraled out of control. I didn't expect it to blow up that much, but it did. How that has affected my ability to meet people? Well, for one, I do get recognized in San Francisco quite a lot on the street even today. People ask for selfies, which is why I wear a Julius t-shirt all the time. So it's like pre-marketing for Julius. But it's also that I think it's really important to do things that are not traditional or somebody wouldn't do in their right minds. For example, building an application when it's in the AI space, when the space is so competitive or things are moving really fast. I think a lot of people don't get started because they're too afraid to make a move. What if a big company does what I'm doing and it's over for me? I think that's not good. You should just get started, build something, give it to people and iterate. You will probably be wrong, but that's okay. Like, you'll learn a lot. So there's definitely been fun, and I've got to meet a lot of really cool people through that. Jensen, however, I met Jensen to show him Julius and sort of talk about how Julius and NVIDIA could work together. So, I think Julius today is an AI data scientist or data analyst. In the future, it could be a whole AI software engineer, right? Data science is sort of like a subset of programming and statistical analysis and logical thinking. We think that's where the models are today and will be in the near future. But as the model capabilities improve, you will be able to have a whole AI engineer to help build you small parts of your code base and build you small applications. We think when this happens, the power of code will now be accessible to millions and millions of people who previously couldn't get access to it because the barrier was high. You have to learn programming. And, the applications for this sort of all over. Everything from scientific computing to financial analysis, and all of that can be accelerated with what NVIDIA is building, GPUs, right? You have massive parallel computing that you can use to accelerate computations, your analysis, code execution, even train models, inference and models. And I basically pitched them that the AI data scientists should have access to GPUs. So he thought he can rock with it. So that's good.
So Rahul, what are some of the technical challenges, and feel free to disclose only what you're able to disclose here, that were especially challenging during the development of Julius, and any learnings or lessons that came out of that?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot. We have pushed a ton of commits in the last 8, 9, 10 months and onboarded a lot of users and scaled way faster than we would have imagined when we first launched it. And one of the biggest challenges in doing so has been scaling our infrastructure. So for context, we manage these code sandboxes that we give to users where the model can freely write and execute code. And managing those sandboxes and scaling them is hard, right? You have a new user come in, you have to provision a new pod, make sure the pod comes built in with some dependencies that the model can get started and start using. And that takes a few minutes. But to the users, it's almost instant. And how do we deliver that experience is hard. And along the way, we have made, a lot of mistakes that we have learned from. And the mistakes were primarily because we grew too quickly. So one of the promises we make to our users is anything you upload to Julius gets deleted after an hour of inactivity. And that's the promise we live by. All the data sets, all the files you upload are automatically deleted. And the way we do that is by destroying the pod that your model was running code in. Now, what happens though is when we have a massive spike of users in a short amount of time, we run out of pods to give to the users. So December 13th was a pretty dark day when we actually went viral overnight, and we got thousands of users within a span of few hours come in at once. And back then, it was the biggest spike we had ever seen, and we ran out of pods to give to users. And as a result of this, we realized we hadn't put in timeouts between our code infrastructure and our backend and our front end. And it sort of
cause this cascading effect of like things just like breaking because there's no more pods to give. And then you have to tell the users, guys, sorry, we actually grew so quickly in the last few hours, we have no pods to give. And sort of restart everything. We were down for 8 hours. And so scaling the infrastructure has been a challenge, because we sort of try to plan for the growth, and the growth sort of, we actually grow more than what we planned for. So, a lot of it is going back and rewriting a lot of the infrastructure code, how it's set up. Right now we're working on adding GPUs to Julius, and that requires, kind of going back to the drawing board and figuring out, how do we do that? Like, when a user logs on Julius and they want to use a GPU, like, how do we find a GPU ready to give to the user? And when we launched R a few weeks ago, that was a whole different thing, because we had to manage these new kernels, make sure that the kernels and the dependencies in the kernels are compatible with what the models remember. Each model has a knowledge cutoff date, whether it be 2022, 2023, or early 2024, they remember certain dependencies and package differently. So how do we make sure that all this is compatible with the code environments and the kernels in Julius? And so a lot of our effort has been there in terms of like engineering challenge or technical challenge. I think another thing is also product challenge, like figuring out how do we make all this complexity as simple as possible to the users, while also communicating to them, hey, what's happening under the hood? Some users run heavy computations, which causes the RAM to sort of go out, or it causes certain timeouts. And how do we surface that to the user in an intuitive way has been something that's been heavily focused on in terms of experience. So I would say a lot of technical challenges in the infrastructure and how the models interact with the infrastructure, and then surfacing that in an intuitive way to the user in the experience.
I appreciate you sharing that. So what are some of the next big milestones for Julius.ai that you're looking forward to?
Look, we want to get really big, and we're really happy with the growth so far. We want to keep growing and make sure that we're solving a lot of problems for our users. Our hope is that, there's millions of people out there who have data sets on their hand and have curiosity about that data. How do we empower them to get insights out of the data is something we aspire to do for everyone, millions of people out there. So that's definitely a milestone. We're starting to see a lot of people in the scientific community adopt Julius. So we're starting to see scientific posters. You mentioned Julius and cite Julius as a source for a lot of the analysis. And our hope is to keep pushing that. I mean, I hope Julius powers one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs in the next few years, because now, biologists can just focus on biology and not struggle with computers. Or, physicists can just focus on physics and not struggle with computers. So those are the qualitative milestones I really care about.
Awesome. And to end, I'm curious what advice you would give to aspiring founders who are building in the AI space.
First thing is, I think, to get started. I think a lot of people today, especially if you've worked in traditional software engineering roles, or if you've built applications before that are super reliable, they have this massive barrier to getting started. And, there's, what the models are today, if the progress were to stop, if there were no new capabilities to come out, I think we have at least 10 more years of product development to do and applications to build with where the models are today. You just have to be really creative, right? Like the vision capabilities are so awesome. You can build so many applications with it, so many tools with it. The multimodal capabilities are so exciting. You can build so many things with it. And when you layer on top of this, when you layer on that the capabilities are going to improve, that's even more exciting, that there's always going to be really interesting things to build. So first thing is to get started. Second thing is, I really believe in shipping fast. I think, when we have a new idea, we try to get it out in Julius within like a week or two at max, and testing the idea against reality. I think when I first got started as a founder, I spent a lot of time trying to come up with a perfectly defensible vision that was like impenetrable and you couldn't argue against it. But what turns out is, your users don't care, or your potential users don't care what your vision is. What they really care about is what problem you solve for them today. So as long as you solve a problem for them and you're obsessed about solving that problem for them, you have a good shot at success. And so constantly test your vision against reality is really, really important. And the third thing is, I think, to have fun. I think there's a lot of people really stressed about, hey, is a big company going to kill my startup? And I think there's plenty of stories out there. Everything from Midjourney. I think Midjourney is a really good example where they built something new that previously didn't exist, like a Discord bot where you could just, type a prompt and get an image. And who thought a Discord bot could get, or Discord server could get really, really big? And what's interesting is that Midjourney preview launched in beta before, like a week or two before DALL-E 2 came out. And honestly, a lot of people who were giving Midjourney a shot would have given up when they saw DALL-E 2 come out. In retrospect, like even today, like Midjourney images just look more realistic. Like they're constantly able to figure out tricks and ideas that they can build into their models and into their product that helps them make images that look better. So as long as they have images that look better, I think people will value Midjourney and love using Midjourney and pay for it. So in the process, like I think it's really important to look at these stories and say, wait, I do have a shot at success. And more about like having fun, building things with people you like working with, and shipping.
Great advice, Rahul. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I feel like we're going to need to title this episode something along the lines of test your vision against reality, or, I know that was a recurring theme throughout, and incredible stories. Very excited for you and your journey with Julius. And where can folks find you online?
You can find Julius on Julius.ai. You can find me on Twitter, twitter.com/0 interest rates. It's the number 0 and then interest rates. I made the account back in the ZERB days, so it's 0 interest rates. And you can also find me on LinkedIn, Rahul Sonwalkar.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rahul.
Cool. Thank you.